We really appreciate your presence this morning as we talk about bridging the English learner assessment gap and what that looks like as we enter into this new and very different school year. So we appreciate that you're here. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Rakes, who is our EL program director, and she will take it away with some content, and then we will have time at the end for questions and answers. So please stick around as you are able or need to in order to chat further about this topic or other things that are coming up for you.
Yes, hi everybody, thanks for being here. Today we're going to be talking about bridging the EL assessment gap. And just let me get this, sorry. I am wanting to see everybody's faces. So there, now I can see you the best that I can. Today we're working on talking about the EL assessment gap. And as you know, we are the DLC, or maybe you don't know, but we connect teachers and leaders with professional learning, with resources and networks to improve outcomes for diverse learners and increase student and leader retention. So in light of that, we're going to talk about a problem that has come up several times for what we're seeing in our EL circles. In the spring, the assessment window was cut short, and many multilingual students were left without consistent scores. And so the question that we want to talk about today is how can we accurately understand where students are linguistically so that we can give them the strongest support possible. So we've got 3 things on our agenda to do that. We're going to talk about identifying the gaps between student scores and abilities. And then we're going to look at the CanDo descriptors and how we can use those to help support us. And then we're going to talk about a couple next best steps. All right, let's get going. So we know the need is clear. We need information on student proficiency levels that's accurate and updated, and therefore it's equitable. If some students have accurate scores and they're receiving instruction based on those accurate scores, but then some students aren't, there's an inequity here. And so we want our service to students to meet them appropriately where they are so that they can all have the chance to succeed, especially now with everything being so up in the air about the different ways that we're going to be working with students and the different ways that they're going to be accessing our education. We have to really understand what their needs are in order to move forward appropriately. So here's what we know. We have students that have their spring semester cut short. Many students were required to do virtual school, but some were totally out of session completely. And then for our multilingual students, that attendance in virtual school was varied very widely across our student population. So some students were really deeply there. Some students were unable to access all of that information as easily. So we've got a big discrepancy there. We also have students who took the access test this spring and they took all 4 parts. They have all the scores and they're ready to go with the composite. Then we also have some students who have either taken just 1, 2, or 3 parts of the assessment. And so those students have partial scores. They're not going to have a composite score, but they are going to have scores for maybe 1 or 2 domains, whichever parts they took. And then we also have some students who didn't take any of the parts. And so because the assessment window went from mid-February, it was supposed to go until April, and school was cut short in March. So some students hadn't taken the test yet. So we've got kids in 3 different categories. We've got full scores, we've got partial scores, and we've got no 2020 scores. In addition to that, we also have the semester being cut short. So we have what some students might experience as what we have called before a summer slide. And that just means that they can lose some of the gains that they made over the school year when there's extended time away from school. And so some of our students have been out of practice with English in person since mid-spring. So we're going to expect that no matter what category those scores fall into, they may not be fully accurate right now. So if a student has a full composite score from the spring, they may still not be completely in alignment with where they are right now because of the extended time away. So we're going to look at some ways that we can really thoughtfully think about where our students are and move forward from there. So we want to identify the gaps between their ability and the assessment scores that they have. So whether you have 3 students or 300 students, the best way is going to be to pinpoint the gaps between them is to get a big picture view of each student. So I'm going to talk about how you can do that a little bit. First thing that we're going to do is to thoughtfully evaluate the information that we have for each student while writing or updating their ILP, or their individualized learning plan. So every EL student has somebody who's taking time to do this. Some of you are using Elevation, some of you are writing them in a form, but there's always time set aside to do these individualized learning plans, and that time is going to be really valuable and important this year. As you're doing that, you also want to collect additional information that you may not have done in the past for the ILP, because we're really trying to get an understanding of where the student is and what they can do right now. So some of that additional information might be talking to families, it might be talking to their prior teachers, it might be looking at distance learning records, and also looking at current work samples or assessments that they're doing right now as school's starting back. After you have that picture of who the students are, next step is going to be to use the WIDA CanDo descriptors to align our knowledge about them and to extend what we know about their language strengths. And then the last piece will be to plan for authentic activities for students in all 4 language domains. We want them to have authentic chances to read, write, speak, and listen. And we're going to monitor that progress and performance as we're going through the school year. So that's kind of our plan. So the first piece is kind of the big one, and that's looking to see where there might be gaps between the assessment scores that we have and what students can do. So we're going to thoughtfully evaluate that information and collect additional information. So some things to consider when you're collecting additional information is over here on this side of the screen. We want to look at their most recent access scores and how they were completed. So when I say most recent, that's either going to be 2019, it might be an initial screener if they were a new student last year, or they may have partial or complete 2020 scores. So we want to look at those scores, want to take into consideration how they were completed, and then we're also going to think about their progress towards the yearly growth measure. If that's something you're unfamiliar with, I included the chart here. This is from the Department of Education. And on the left, this is a great tool for understanding if students are making the growth that you want them to make. So on the left, we have the score that they have. And then on the right, it has these numbers that they're calling the growth standard. So that's how much we would expect a student in this score range to grow for a year. So we want this number or more. So for example, let's say that I had a student who was a 2.0 in 2019, and she took the assessment and got a complete composite score in 2020. So I would look for 2.0, and it says the growth standard is the growth standard is 0.8. So we would expect that that student is a 2.8 in 2020 or higher. That would be a year's growth. And if a student's not making that year's growth, that's automatically in the past been a red flag for us. So that's something that you can look at and say, why aren't they making the growth that we want them to make? How can I push them forward? So that's something to look at now this year and see if, even if they just have partial scores, you can look and see if those partial scores are moving along that growth standard. You can also use the CanDos to kind of look at that as well. So if I don't have scores for a student that's a 3.0, maybe I would look at, okay, if they're a 3.4, that would be a year's growth. Maybe these align. You also want to think about how long they've been in the EL program. Maybe they are a newcomer, so that's going to be a little bit different than if they are a student that's a long-term EL. You want to look at student grades, both from an in-person school and online school perspective. You want to talk to their previous teachers, like we said before, and look at their participation in online learning and look at current work samples. Another thing that you can look at, we've linked a language assessment here. I'm going to click on it. Hopefully it'll take us to the right place. This is a great survey or tool that you can use with students that's been put out by the Council for Great City Schools. I'm going to scroll down real quick and just give you a quick peek at it. But it's got some interview questions that you would use with your students. So you would start by asking them, and it gives you some examples of what kind of category they might fall into. for proficiency level. So it's got some ideas for a beginner would kind of fall in here, an intermediate student would fall here, and then later on it has different categories for, it has 3 categories here for beginner, intermediate, advanced. That's something, this is something I would encourage you to take into account. It also breaks it into grade level bands. So we've got, you know, K2 at the beginning, and then 3, 5 here, and then as you go on, it's got some more information. So definitely think about using something like this to take a look at where your students might be. It's going to give you some more information. Even if you don't do the whole assessment with them, just some of these questions are going to help you build that knowledge that you need to have for your students. So after we've identified the gaps and we've got a picture of who the students are, we want to use the CanDo descriptors. So these are a tool that we use from WIDA. They're put out by the same people that write the Access Assessment. If you're unfamiliar with them, I've also linked them here, and I'm sure we can get that to you. They're broken by grade level band, and so there's different ones for K2, 3, 5, all of that. They're broken into proficiency level across the top, and then language domain on the left. And so if you have a student who has scores that are, for example, a reading score is their a 3.0, you can find exactly what a student should be able to do at a 3.0 in reading. And so it's sort of, some people use it like a rubric, but it's really useful for looking at where students might be. So we're going to take what we know about the students already, and we're going to take the CanDos and compare. So are these CanDos that I'm seeing for these proficiency levels that I've been given for the student, are they a good fit with what all of this work and all of this stuff that I've looked at that I know now the student can do? And then we're going to flag items that seem out of alignment. So some red flags might be a student has a really low speaking score. And so you look at the CanDos for that and you're like, I know that I've had like an academic talk with this kid. I know that they can do more than what this CanDo says. I'm going to read the next one. They can actually do this part too. So you're going to just flag things that might not show exactly where that student is and get a better understanding of where they might fall on the CanDos. After you've looked at those, you've got a couple of options. So either the CanDos are going to align with what you know about the student, or they're not going to align. If they do, then that's great. That means that you have the right puzzle piece in place for the whole, looking at the whole big picture of this student. So as you think about the student, you're going to continue to use best practices for them. You're going to accommodate materials based on CanDo scores or current scores and CanDo descriptors. You're going to think about using strong SEL practices. You're going to confer with their teachers. You might even consider adopting using some model performance indicators at your school, MPIs, which break down student expectations based on proficiency level. And then you're going to monitor their grades and what they're doing bi-quarterly. So we've even worked with students and schools who have these big spreadsheets that put all their EL students, and they put their grades and their teachers and all this information together so they get a high level view of where they are, and that shows them some more information as well. So that's something that you could consider doing for yours as well. The other option is that the scores don't seem to align. So I'm going to give you 2 pieces that you can do if this is the case. So the first option is to have what I'm going to call an ILP meeting, an individualized learning plan. So you want to bring in all the teachers and educators who have a stake in the student's education and talk to them and work together to kind of workshop where you can move the student, where their actual CanDos might be, and pinpoint appropriate goals for the student using the CanDo descriptors. So like I said before, take those red flags, and if you don't think that a score is accurate, use the CanDos to help your team develop scores that are more accurate. You're going to use clear evidence from current student work to drive that discussion. And the new understanding is going to help you, excuse me, create a plan that's better suited for the student and can be distributed to all the teachers that serve the student. So this is a great option for if you just have students with maybe small to medium score or ability discrepancies. So there's a couple red flags, or maybe just one of their domains seems out of whack. This is also really helpful to have teaching teams that are familiar with the CanDos and who feel comfortable navigating through all those pieces. If this is something that's maybe unfamiliar to your whole team, this may not be the easiest option for you. It's still totally possible, but it's going to take a little more work because there's a lot of information in that CanDo chart to go through, and to really line that up with student work and student information is it takes a lot. And so if you're unfamiliar with that, it might be a little trickier. So the other option is to use the Access Online Model Assessment. So this is put out by WIDA, and it's not progress monitoring because it's not something that you use consistently over and over, but it is a predictor for how kids are going to do on the Access test. And so this is a purchase option, but you can purchase a school license, you can purchase an individual student license, and it's going to predict more accurately where they are. In the past, this was something that we did one-on-one, face-to-face with students as like a checklist and a rubric. And if I was the teacher giving it, you would see what they're working on and make notes about them and come up with an idea of where their scores accurately could be. So now, since our test is online for Access, we can also do this online, which is great because they can take it in groups, they can take it individually, and the scores are available immediately. So this is a great option for kids who don't have scores or at all, and their scores from the past seem really not in alignment with where they are right now. So that's like a large score discrepancy with their abilities. And it's also great for EL teams that want clearer guidance for specific students. And so maybe you just have some students, and as they're going through these first couple of weeks, you're just really unsure about the best way to support them. This would be a great next step for them. So those are the two options that you can look at if the scores don't seem to match up with where you're seeing that they are. At the end of the day, what we want our kids to know is they're more than that number. We know that, but we want our students to also understand this number is just here to help us guide our steps towards supporting them. And so that's why we're workshopping it so much, is trying to figure out what's the next best step for them. So thank you for joining us today. I hope that that was some helpful information, and we'll be here, I think, to take some questions and chat if you would like to.
And next week we will have a additional coffee chat on virtual progress monitoring, same time, and you can register for those on our website, which I'll drop the URL in the chat. I also added the link to the assessment that Mary had clicked on, and that's in the chat, and I will send out a slide deck afterwards as well to those who are in attendance. So be on the lookout for that, but we're here for questions as you have them.